What's the creepiest true story you have, or one someone has told you? I live in a really rural place, so it's not uncommon to have really long stretches of road with absolutely no civilization at all. No lights, no other cars, no nothing for miles and miles. One night, my friend was driving back from a bonfire party in the desert when she said she just saw what looked like a guy walking along the side of the road. She could see him moving way up ahead of her, and as she got closer, she started to notice that the way he was moving was very unusual. His arms seemed too long, and she described his gait to me as nothing she'd ever seen a human being do. She said it was like he was constantly staggering, but never falling over. She told me that as she got close enough to pass him, she just knew that she didn't want to see this thing's face. She turned her rearview mirror away from her, drove by as fast as she could, and didn't look back. She called me later to tell me about this. She was actually really creeped out because the thing had been heading in the direction of our town. Okay, on the subject of demon-related stories, I'm atheist, but this is creepy. My uncle is the pastor of a church in Oklahoma, and one of his closest buddies is a youth minister in a church in a neighboring town. He has a wife and one daughter. Every Saturday morning when his daughter was younger, around 5, 6 or so, she and his wife would get up really early and cook breakfast. One morning, the daughter saw the kitchen light turn on from her room and heard some of the pots and pans being moved around. And she thought, why is my mom making breakfast without me? So she got up and went to check, but it was about 4 a.m. and no one was in the kitchen and all the lights were off. She went to her parents' room and asked, "Mommy, why did you try to start breakfast without me?" Her mom thought it had been her in the kitchen making that noise. So she woke up her husband, my uncle's friend, thinking someone was in the house. He grabbed an old aluminum baseball bat and walked into the dark house. He checked the kitchen and besides some pots and pans being out, nothing seemed too greatly disturbed. Next to the kitchen is a reading room with a couch and a rocking chair. When he walked in there, he could barely make out the rocking chair, which is rapidly rocking with no one sitting in it. He jumped back frightened and grabbed a Bible sitting on the shelf and screamed, "In the name of Jesus, leave my house." And the chair instantly halted. Nothing like that ever happened again. I'm not a believer but nonetheless, creepy story. About a year and a half ago, my best friend of 15 plus years and I took a trip out to my family farm at night after getting out of our second shift job. It was a nice clear, crisp early fall night in Michigan. We were sitting there, just chit-chatting away and watching the night sky when he asked a very peculiar question. He said, "This place has always had a strange feel to it, almost like you are being watched. Did something happen here? Something bad, I mean." I just laughed a little and I replied that I only knew the stories that my father told me. I told him about how when my great-grandpa purchased a farm in the early 30s, that it was a big family project to keep it up and running. Relatives would come and help with the chores and in exchange, be able to hunt the land for food. My great-grandpa had a cousin that came over one day, help out, and asked if he could go out later that night to do some coon hunting. He of course got permission and set out shortly after sundown. The next morning, my great-grandpa noticed that his vehicle was still out in driveway, even though he should have left hours before. It was still dark out, but my great-grandpa knew the area of the land he would be hunting and set off in that direction. He walked back towards the back pasture field, and as he came around a bend, he hollered my cousin's name. He heard a strange yet familiar voice answer him back. He said that the voice chilled him to the bone, that something wasn't quite right about it. So he called out again, and this time, the voice was for sure not his cousin's, but almost like a growl imitating his voice. He said he hightailed it out of there, never looking back. When the sun came up, he took a big group of relatives and farm hands to look for him. They found his gun, loaded, but not fired, his hat, which was covered in a brown liquid spattering, and that was all. My great-grandpa looked for any signs of him for over 60 plus years. The only time he ever held out hope of finding him, my dad said, was when the swamp in the pasture fields by where he was supposed to be hunting dried up. Back to the very beginning, on the night with myself and my best friend out on the farm. I told him all of this. After I was finished, he turns to me and asks why the heck hasn't anything been done about it. Why not a grid search or low-lying aerial photography to see if there was anything to be seen? I chuckled, explaining to him that I was pretty sure these were all ghost stories, that none of it was true. Of course, that was when the world laughed at me and decided to prove just how real these stories were. We had parked up by the barn which also served as the slaughterhouse. For the last decade, the farm has been on the reserve list. This means that it is no longer farmed but is set aside for future generations to use. The farm is now largely just a deer camp. The barn is close to the house that my second or third cousins now live in. As we were sitting there, we began to feel uneasy, like something very wrong was about to happen. At first I chalked it up to two grown men getting scared by a dumb ghost story, but as the feeling became more prominent, I could not escape the fact that something felt horribly out of place. And then the dogs my cousins own went ballistic. I mean crazy. This weren't barks of aggression, but of fear. Terror. Something was frightening them out of their minds. The dog pen was about 100 feet of pitch blackness away from us, around the back part of the house, just out of sight. It was basically a chain link fence with a door, big enough to hold the 3 German shepherds. Over the sound of the dogs barking, we could hear something trying to beat the fence down, to force its way in or out. I was betting on it being the dogs trying to get out, and I didn't want to be there to be attacked by 3 terrified German shepherds. As I looked at my friend to tell him it was time to go, we heard what I can only describe as the scariest fleabing sound I have ever heard. It was a sound that could not be explained, except that to me, it was the herald of death. It chilled me to the core and sent waves of terror through me. I cannot really go into more detail than that, it is something that must be experienced to understand. Without one more word, we were both in the car and throwing gravel everywhere as we booked it out of there. My cousins never woke up to those sounds that night. Apparently they sleep with a white noise machine on, I guess. For those that don't know, that is a machine that produces a soothing ambient noise to cancel out any sounds from outside the room. They did, however, lose a dog that night and have to rebuild the dog pen. The local authorities ruled it a coyote attack and moved on. My mom told me a story about her cousin Bobby. Bobby and his girlfriend got in a severe car accident and his girlfriend died while he lived. After the accident, he had a reoccurring dream that he and his girlfriend were on opposite sides of a river. She would always scream and try to get him to swim across the river to her, but he refused. One night, he woke up and said goodbye to everyone in his family and that he'd never see them again. Everyone was very confused, and he explained that he had dreamed that he had crossed the river. He died the next day. In a car crash. And no, the car crash was not his fault. So one summer when I was about 16, I took a job babysitting 2 girls Monday through Friday while their parents worked. I would go over to their house early around 6 a.m. and their mother would leave for work. The girls generally stayed asleep till 10 a.m., so I would watch TV in the living room downstairs until they woke up. At first it started small. At some point in the morning, I would feel like someone was standing behind me in the kitchen or at the staircase. I assumed it was one of the girls trying to play a prank and sneak up on me. I would get up, walk through the kitchen and then slowly creep up the stairs to try and bust them, but they were never there. This happened at least twice a week. Then one morning while I was watching TV, the channels started turning. I assumed I was sitting on the remote and started looking through the couch. Couldn't find it in there and I turn around and realize it's sitting on the coffee table, not pressed against anything. Not only that, the channels aren't flipping in order, they are changing as if someone is selecting them manually. First 12, then 34, back to 3 and so on. I run to the stairs to see if one of the girls is playing a prank and again, no one is there and the girls are in their rooms asleep. The final thing that happened that finally got me to bring the weird occurrences to their mother was one morning, she asked me if I could help prepare for her daughter's birthday and blow up some balloons. I told her yes and she gave me a pump to fill the balloons up with. Well, in the middle of doing it, I got thirsty and set the pump on the counter next to the refrigerator. When I finished grabbing my drink and closed the door, the pump goes flying out the kitchen and rolls into the living room. At this point, I'm still trying to be logical about it. I assume I must have shut the door too hard, and that's what knocked it off and sent it flying. I picked the pump up, place it back on the counter and shut the fridge with the same force as last time. It doesn't budge. Then again, but harder. Nothing. After a couple of more tries adjusting the location of where the pump was and the force of me closing the door, I came to the conclusion that something else must have sent it flying. That evening when I tell her mom the strange things that have been happening, she gets real quiet and says, "It's been happening to you too?" I was stunned. She then goes on to tell me that the TV thing has been happening to her too, and that the girls say they sometimes see kids playing in the backyard that aren't there. She told the girls not to tell me anything because she didn't want to lose another babysitter. My parents decided to take my younger sister and me out for a weekend mini vacation. They chose to stay at Manresa Castle, an old manor that was at one time a monastery. They didn't really tell us much about it before we got there, but I was and am a total history nerd, so I was in love with the prospect of staying somewhere old. My parents got a room separate from my sister's and mine. They were in a newer area, I'm guessing, because their bathroom was part of their room. It was also at the end of the hall. My sister and I were assigned a room in the middle of the hall, just opposite the stairs, and our bathroom was on the way to our parents' room. For some reason, I never went into our assigned bathroom. Well, that's a lie. I went in there once to pee, thought it felt weird in there, and insisted on using my parents' bathroom later every other single time. I've always been, and continue to be, a bit of a night owl, so I had some trouble falling asleep. It was also really darn hot in our room, old heater, maybe, and a street light outside is bothering me. I sleep better without light. It doesn't help that the doors or walls are incredibly thin, and I can hear other guests returning from nights out, walking to their rooms, giggling and chatting and shushing each other. Things quiet down, and now it's around midnight. I hear the doorknob start to jiggle, like someone's trying to open it. I call out, "Hello?" Finding it weird that someone's trying to get in at midnight, but also, WTF, I didn't hear anyone approach. My sister wakes up from my talking, peeved. She asks what the heck am I doing? I ask if she heard anything. She says no and goes back to sleep. It takes a lot longer for me to go back to sleep. The next night, our last night there. Remember, this was a weekend trip. I'm in my parents' room. I've just showered, gotten ready for bed. My parents are watching a documentary about Star Wars, one of my dad's favorites that I was raised on, so I join in. All of a sudden, we hear this loud bang from the wall. They're on the end of the hall, but it's the side they share with another room, so we figure it's just the neighbors bothered by hearing the TV. We lower the volume, all muttering something along the lines of, "Sheesh." A little knock would have sufficed. The next morning at breakfast, my dad tells me that he was brushing his teeth when he hears the people in the next room. One person asks the other if they heard that huge bang last night, the other says yeah, and they both wonder at it for a while. After breakfast, it's time for checkout. Only then do I discover the collection in the lobby, books with anecdotes of hauntings from the hotel. Turns out, the bathroom I was so averse to, a man and his son came up the stairs once and heard someone sobbing in the bathroom. They knock on the door, trying to ask if everything's okay, but the sobbing just continues. They go downstairs to get a staff member to unlock the door. The door opens. The sobbing has stopped. But the floor is absolutely covered in tissues. Also, the room at the opposite end of the hall from my parents has seen a lot of activity. Someone, can't remember if it was a monk or a bride-to-be, hung themselves in that tower room, and since then, people have been waking up feeling like someone's looking at them, someone's constricting their breathing, someone's putting pressure on their back. One story told of a woman getting scratched all down her back.